So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. My name is Sagar Kapoor. I'm a part of customer success team at Tableau. So VizConnect was started last year as a community project with one of the Tableau ambassadors, Divya Bharti, in which we had an intent how we can go ahead and connect our community to each other. So that's our team right now, Adam, Aloysius, Judith. You can go ahead and reach out to them. And this has been possible with the help of our amazing Tableau community. We have posted close to 45 sessions now. Over 6,000 people are attended our sessions. We have a YouTube page in which you can go ahead and access all the awesome content which is shared by our community. We have a LinkedIn page in which you can go ahead, connect with each other and learn from each other. So that's our YouTube page. Go ahead, subscribe to it and learn some great content which the community has shared. Join our LinkedIn group, go ahead, connect with each other, and start learning from each other. Let me introduce you to our speaker today, Zach Bowders. Zach is an analyst at LSAC, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. He has been featured Tableau author this past year, as well as a co-winner of the Tableau VIZ for Greatest Growth. You have probably seen him copy colorful VIZs on the variety of geeky topics from the film franchises to comic books. And today, he will talk to us about Love What You Viz and Viz What You Love. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Zach.
All right. Well, I'm glad to be here this morning. It is morning for me. It's about 6:30, which feels early, but I start work at 7 every day, so this isn't really that bad. If you already know the sound of my voice, it's because you've listened to my podcast, and you know I'm used to working in a medium that doesn't allow for visuals or is exclusively visuals. So in this case, I'm going to be doing both. Don't expect as many eye-popping things as I might do in a typical Viz because I am not a PowerPoint master, but I did have some fun with this. Can you see everything okay? Are we good to go?
I think we are not able to see your screen, Zach.
All right.
Yeah.
And that's why you ask. Okay. And sorry for any trouble here. I am a Zoom person, so WebEx is there we go. We're good to go. Okay,
Yes.
so do we have enough people on? Are we good to start?
We are good to start. Yeah.
Okay. So when I was first asked to do VizConnect, it was because my friend Adam Miko came to me and said, "You should really do a VizConnect." And being a good friend that gives into peer pressure and caves very quickly, I said, "Sure," not knowing exactly what I would talk about. In fact, I didn't really know what I was going to talk about well after I had the title. I do know that for me, one of my big ethics in terms of how I do public visualization has shifted to be I want to cover things I'm really interested in, which is a shift away from how I worked when I first joined the Tableau community. A lot of my work was Makeover Mondays and community exercises, which are super valuable tools for developing your basic Tableau development and storytelling abilities. But oftentimes, if you're not feeling super inspired by it, you can phone it in. So that led to my shifting away from that. So as you can see on screen, love what you viz what you love. Let's get into it. So who's this guy? This is a viz I made of myself. Two of these are real. One of them's a projection. These are mapped Cartesian points with obviously some gradient thrown in the background. I'm hoping when I'm 68, I can have a cool nickname like Buddy. That's aspirational. I don't know if I'm going to achieve that, but I see like the cool old dudes, and I think I might be able to pull it off one day. But at any rate, this is the kind of thing you'll see me doing. This was part of a series of novel timelines that I've been working on. So one of the things that I sort of have embraced in my public visualization work is creating novel charts and or using charts differently outside of their intended purpose. And in this case, here's a timeline of me visualized by portraits of me. Okay, so that's not the picture I meant to have here. That's my 6-year-old Evangeline. This was at her unicorn birthday party last month. She insisted on having these crazy party hats and wearing them two at a time on her head, which looked just really maniacal. Um, so sorry, that's the wrong picture. Okay, that's the right picture. That's me wearing also the two party hats on my head at one time and looking maniacal. I think I do it better, but she looks like a tiny girl version of me. So really, you're just seeing two sides of the same coin there. Like who wore it better? I'll do a survey later. So about me. If you don't know me personally, which a lot of you don't, and a lot of you may have never heard of me before, which is totally reasonable. There's no reason you should know me. I'm an analyst at ALSAC St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, if you've heard of it before, is a nonprofit pediatric and childhood illness research and treatment center that charges nothing. So any patient that comes through our doors doesn't pay for their treatment, their food, their housing, their travel, any of that, which means we have to raise a lot of money. And that's where ALSAC comes in. ALSAC is where I work, and we are the organization that is responsible for making that money. As an analyst there, I help to analyze our various fundraising initiatives and find out what will help maximize our donor dollars as well as keep our donors engaged and interested in funding the mission. It's a really great mission. I've worked there 13 years now, and we just received an award from Fast Times this past week as the most innovative company of the year, which beat out all the companies you would expect, like Google, Facebook, Amazon. We were number one, which was a real honor and shocking. But sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't see just how much you're pushing things forward because you don't see what everyone else is doing. This past year at the Tableau conference, I was the co-winner of the Vizzy for Greatest Growth. The Vizzies are an award given out by the Tableau Wannabe podcast and voted on by the Tableau community. Um, my co-award winner was Pradeep Kumar, whose work you've seen, and he is phenomenal. He's way better than me, guys. But the gist of it is, I think I won this award this past year because of some shifts in my focus and some shifts in what I decided to visit and how I decided to visit, and I'll be talking about that. I am a podcaster. I recently hit 3,000 listens this past week on my podcast, Data Plus Love, which is a podcast celebrating the data viz community and Tableau specifically, although I am definitely open to branching out beyond that. One thing I learned from attending the Tableau conference was that oftentimes the person behind the viz is at least as interesting as the viz itself, but we don't really get access to that by viewing people's portfolios online. We see some cool images, and we oftentimes form our thoughts and feelings on who that person is based on their work. So it's really important to be able to sort of get behind that and understand that there are people behind it. There are all sorts of different kinds of people with different backgrounds, and that oftentimes we can build someone up and be intimidated by them, and there's absolutely no reason to. If you've listened to my interview with Kevin Flerledge, who's a Zen master and has one more Vizzies than, good Lord, anyone, Kevin's a super normal, down to earth guy, and he has many of the same reservations and concerns that everyone else does. It's just don't be intimidated by the fact that someone has been successful. I'm a cat person, not a dog person. I will brace for your virtual stones. Um, I don't know. They're quieter. They don't demand as much of me. My dog is loud. You might hear her barking in the background at some point during this. It is 6:30 in the morning. I have two girls, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. Girls are way more violent than I ever anticipated. I actually have a dead front tooth from when one of them head-butted me in the face. I'm also a voracious listener, and by that I mean I consume audiobooks and podcasts quite a bit. It's my preferred medium right now for consuming new media because I can do it while doing anything else. And lastly, I'm a data artist wannabe. Some might claim I'm a data artist now. I don't really think so, but I would eventually like to work collectively with other people in the realm and create books and various other things. I really find data art to be a fascinating and valuable means of communicating ideas. So I'm going to talk to you today about my three prime directives, and then I'm going to talk about some of my secret weapons. So my prime directives are the sort of ethics that drive my public data visualization work as well as my online interactions. Obviously, anyone's work is different than their online work, unless you're just sort of creating business dashboards online, which there's nothing wrong with that. And if that's your lane, I am 100% in support of you. Um, But for me, I do my public work because I'd like to do something different and sort of shake things up creatively. If I weren't doing that, I'd be drawing. So prime directives serve the public trust, protect the innocent, and uphold the law. And those would be great prime directives if I were RoboCop, because those are his. He also has a fourth one. But anyway, what I'm saying is it's good to have some rules. And for these rules, I had these already codified in my mind before I agreed to do this. My tips and tricks, that's something I didn't quite have down. This is going to be a far less technical presentation than some of the ones you've seen before. If you watch Judith Becker's presentation, who I am a massive fan of, hers involved a lot more hands-on tips and tricks. These will be shifts in your thinking that can help you create vizzes that you might be more interested in. So what are my prime directives? Have fun, be positive, and elevate others. So first off, let's talk about having fun. I tend to choose topics that I'm interested in, whether that be the Green Lantern expanded universe or the history of Black comic book characters and their creators, or Marty McFly's timeline. I choose stuff that is interesting to me, and if it's interesting to anyone else, that's kind of neither here or there when I'm designing something, because I want to make something that interests me and personally draws me and it makes me happy. And the result I've had from that is by choosing things that I was personally invested in and knew I could hit out of the park and would be willing to put in the extra effort and make something that made myself really happy. I've had great responses with other people being interested in it, even if it's not necessarily their cup of tea. I'm not a sports viz guy, but when I see a sports viz made by someone that is passionately into sports and heavily invested in it, like if you look at Jeff Plattner's latest sports viz prints, they're astonishing, they're beautiful, and they're wonderful. And if he were not as interested in sports and he were creating these, I doubt he would have gotten to as fine a product as he has by working on those. Number two, be positive. So you typically won't see me expressing a lot of negative sentiments online, or if you have, it's unintentional. Everyone has bad days, and everyone has negative feelings. Everyone has political, religious, ideological views. Um, I try to keep that out of my Twitter feed, which is my primary means of communicating with the database community. And there's a few reasons for that. One, I intentionally chose to take on a role of a cheerleader within this community. And as such, you don't necessarily see cheerleaders negging on other people. And if I were to take a lot of positions or express a lot of views, even the most benign political position, 50% of your audience isn't on board. So you've already kind of shut down half of your audience. And I'm happy to talk with anyone about whatever I may think or believe, one on one, just like typical people do. But online, it's not the medium for that kind of thing, and interactions rarely go well. I mean, we see it every day. So I choose instead to be positive, and part of that, like I said, is avoiding certain topics, but also elevating other topics. The world's got lots of problems. I'm not usually the best person for communicating those problems. Part of that is because an ethic that was drilled into me by one of my senior vice presidents was if you're going to talk about a problem, also have a proposed solution. And I really don't have a lot of solutions for a lot of the world's problems. But what I do see when I look at data often is I do see good things happening. And when I can, I would like to promote that because while it's absolutely true that the world has lots of flaws, the world also has lots of good stuff going on. And if we choose to just focus on one versus the other, then we're sort of only partly representing reality. So I'm not saying that to be a Pollyanna or that representing the issues of the world are wrong. I'm just saying I'm going to choose to represent the positive things, and I think we'll ultimately reach a balance by enough people doing both. Number three, elevate others. So you don't know me because of me. You know me because enough other people elevated me. Um, and I say that to mean there's a great community that has been built around Tableau as a tool and the larger database community, but Tableau specifically, people have been incredibly generous with their time, helping, promoting, supporting others. That's how I have gotten a podcast platform. I chose to make a podcast, but I have listeners because I knew people. And I know these people because I made public data visualizations, and I made public data visualizations because people were interested in seeing each other's output and providing positive feedback and building people up. So, I mean, the fact that we have a community that is so flat in terms of hierarchy, and I don't say that to mean we don't have people that are Zen masters and ambassadors. I say that to mean you can go talk to a Zen master and an ambassador, and they're not going to be like, "Who are you? I've got no time for that." Everyone's incredibly generous. Um, it's incredibly humbling how many people want to reach out and talk to each other. So just with this Iron Viz season, I have never done an Iron Viz entry before, but I did my first this season. And not only did I have so many people willing to look at mine and provide feedback and critique it, I had so many people asking me to do the same for theirs. And that's not something you would typically get in something that's a contest with, money attached to it. Which is one of the reasons I've said in terms of Iron Viz, remember, it's a contest, not a competition. We are all trying to do the best work, and someone else doing their best doesn't diminish your best. So let's talk about fun. Albert Einstein said creativity is intelligence having fun. And I think that's just such an apropos quote because it's hard to be creative. And to show you that, let me show you my first viz I ever put on Tableau Public. So I created this viz about M. Night Shyamalan. I did not actually know Tableau Public was a thing. I created this on Tableau Desktop on a whim because I was trying to sort of get extra reps in practicing my skills, and I also wanted to do something creative. Like I said, if I weren't creating public data vizzes, I'd be drawing. So this was my example of drawing this. It's actually not bad looking. Like I feel pretty good about the colors and the formatting's pretty good. Um, but it's very representative of the dashboarding I was doing at work at the time. Actually, David Kelly, my colleague, sort of drove this format at work with the sort of call out boxes and that sort of thing. So I created this as a way of stretching some muscles at work and getting some reps in. And because I am interested in genre film and, you know, controversy to a degree, because M. Night Shyamalan, is he good or bad? That was an interesting question to ask and look at how the audience and the viewers respond differently. It was something I was really invested in. So I put a lot of time in this to make it look like I wanted it to look with the skills I had at the time. And I'm pretty happy with it. Let me show you a viz that I wasn't as invested in. Okay, so this was a Makeover Monday exercise, and this is in no way a slight to Makeover Monday, because Makeover Monday has been incredibly impactful in my personal development. But this clearly was a data set I was not super interested in. And as a result, rather than trying to find something interesting to do with the data, and again, this is with my skills at the time, I tried to make it visually interesting by crazy titles and graphics. The colors aren't bad. I'm actually good with that. But looking back at this is incredibly embarrassing having back in my own timeline. But it shows some of that personal development because looking at this, I'm like, surely there was a better way to talk about the data rather than making my graphics the biggest, most important thing on the page. Here's another example of a data set I actually cared about. So this is the plot line of the movie Inception mapped out with Cartesian coordinates, which if you've never done, it's not hard. It's if you've ever mapped something on graph paper, that's it. You're just doing that in Tableau. So I actually got this idea in church one day. I was sitting there and I was like, what would the movie Inception look like if I had to draw it? That's not to say that my pastor was doing a bad job with the sermon. It's just that I had an idea. And sometimes when an idea strikes, you have to go with it. Actually, that's sort of my whole personal database visualization story. I don't have like a list of my next vizzes come up. Like this is the list of my next vizzes. It's blank right now because I typically have an idea, I attack it viciously, and then I put it out, and then it's done. And then I spend a good deal of time feeling like a fraud who's never going to have another idea, and then I have another idea. So that's my personal method. I hope yours isn't like that because it's not the most fun way to work because you spend periods of time, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 2 weeks, sitting there like, I think I'm out. Like, I don't think I have anything else in the tank. And then you get inspiration again. But obviously, this viz of Inception, I was inspired. So it was tricky to track the timelines of 7 different characters across 4 levels of dreams and a waking world and a sleeping world, and I wanted to find a way to map that out. Because you can't draw that on a map because the location is fixed. They're all asleep. so just be a pinpoint. But what's it like to sort of dip down into these dreams? How far does each of them go? And how did they all get back from it? Let's look at this one. This one is another Makeover Monday data set that I wasn't super interested in. So, and honestly, my skill set was different at the time, but that doesn't excuse any of this. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really say anything. The colors are aggressive because I was bored and I thought I could make it interesting with color. But I was trying to take something that I wasn't super invested in and make something that made me interested. And even then, I failed to succeed because I'm not interested in this. I just thought it would look interesting. And it does kind of look interesting. There's lots of color, but it's not saying anything. Hippocrates was considered the father of medicine. So in ancient Greece, Hippocrates spearheaded a lot of rigor in the area of medicine, from the idea that medicine was a practice that you had to continually learn in, that there was a certain amount of rigor expected and discipline to practice medicine, even down to like keeping fingernails at a certain length. But primarily, when we think of Hippocrates, we think of the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. This is that idea of I want to do positive things and I want to promote things that I think are uplifting and lead in a positive direction. So I've been into Hans Rosling lately, and that's because Steve Wexler turned me on to him in one of his classes. But Hans Rosling was a Swedish professor who did a lot of research into poverty, among other things, but he was a doctor. He went on to speak at Davos and many other places and has some amazing TED Talks that you absolutely have to watch. But Rosling's work that's most memorable to me is in the area of poverty and talking about how we have perceptions about poverty in the world and about the sizes of families and about the availability of medicine that may not necessarily be in line with reality. Um, and in his book, Factfulness, which I highly recommend, he expands that idea that we think of the world as a first world and a third world, but in reality, there's about 4 tiers of progression throughout sort of not societal evolution, but maybe monetary evolution. And that as soon as families reach enough money to not live hand to mouth, which is much lower than you'd expect actually, they shift from the mindset of we need to have as many children as possible because our children are at risk and we need them as a source of labor to our children are now an asset and we're shifting towards education. And one of the big drivers of this, as he describes in his books, is access to vaccination, because vaccination, particularly for infants, is a big driver of living. Um, so there was a data set that came out a couple months ago about WHO vaccination records, and so many people create so many wonderful visualizations of it. As I started to investigate the data set, I was thinking of Rosling, and I was thinking about I want to find some of those cases where we have seen these dramatic shifts, because a lot of times some of the perceptions we have of different places in the world are so outdated. I mean, even when we think of Sweden, where Rosling was from, Sweden in the 1960s was not considered part of the fourth tier of societal growth, as he would put it himself. They were part of the second tier. As a child, he actually fell into a puddle of like waste in the side of the road, and his grandmother had to wash his eyes out with unclean water. I mean, this was a guy that was alive for TED Talks. This wasn't in the 1800s. So a lot has changed very quickly. And oftentimes, when our data is outdated, we don't make decisions that are as valuable. So looking at this particular data set, I found three countries in particular, but there's more, that dramatically expanded their vaccinations over, just 30 years. I mean, this is my lifetime. I was born in 1981, so I'm 39 now, guys. I found out I was middle-aged the other day. That wasn't great. But the gist of this is, look how explosive this growth is, and just imagine what that does for society when they've gone from having virtually no vaccination to nearly all vaccinated. I mean, those numbers that they're representing now as of 2018, those are on par with like Western nations, which did not have significant growth, which have been fairly stagnant in some cases, have dipped up and down over time. I mean, we know in the US particularly, there's an anti-vax movement right now, which is staggering. I created this right after Tableau conference this year, and it's because in part I was just looking to try something different. And this is almost a bit of visual art, but I've experimented with Color Oracle's tool in the past for looking at accessibility of color in data visualizations. I'm a big color guy. If you've ever seen Doc Kev Elder's presentation on color blindness, Doc is like gray colorblind, which I didn't even know was a thing, which means to him, if he is looking at a TV screen, everything on screen is a shade of gray, which has to be incredibly difficult to navigate a lot of different situations because so many things are dependent on color. So I created a simple visualization here showing red and green through 3 different types of color blindness, as well as what it looks like with normal vision. For me, it was less of a warning about color blindness and more of an awareness, because I don't think for those of us that aren't colorblind, we know what it's like to not really see colors represented as sort of they're intended to. So for me, this was sort of a fascinating color exercise that wasn't super difficult, but in the simplicity, I was drawn to it, and I thought it'd be very cool to just sort of put that out there and say, hey, look, we can see what it's like to be colorblind, and if you can see what it's like to be colorblind, you can address color blindness more easily in your own work. Many of you know Rodrigo in the Tableau community and his daughter, baby Alice. Alice suffered a traumatic head injury as an infant. This data set was part of Project Health Viz, which is Lindsay Betzendahl's initiative, which covers health data sets every month. So Rodrigo collected a lot of data about his doctor's appointments over several years and offered that to the project. So Alice has been dealing with this traumatic brain injury for years and just has had all sorts of appointments and treatments. And I can't imagine the mental and emotional toll it takes on the family. And I wanted to create a Viz that represented sort of the hope of her recovery, as well as the hope that the family will recover a significant amount of the money that they've paid out of network from their health insurance. So I was inspired by a piece from Banksy with the girl with the balloon, and I did this homage to it. And you see, I credited Banksy underneath the girl, as you do on an homage art piece. But I was really inspired by that. And rather than just going with a typical sort of Tableau-like visualization, I leaned much more heavily on a graffiti aesthetic to try to get attention, but then also draw the interest to the topic itself. We rise by lifting others. So, talking about the idea of elevating others, like I said, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if others had not elevated me. Um, this is far from an inclusive list of times that other people have invited me. In fact, this probably shows my first 8 months in the Tableau community at most. But the fact is that if you are part of the Tableau community, interacting with others, doing public work, participating in exercises, watching VizConnect, you're creating a network around you. And those people talk to you, they give you feedback, they promote you, you promote them. No one is a solo practitioner in this. If you were just doing your work by yourself, you would be missing out on an incredible community that is giving back to you and that you are feeding into by being a creator. So all I ask in terms of this of myself is that when I see good work, I compliment it. When someone wants feedback, I give it. That I'm honest and generous, and that honestly, giving someone a like costs you nothing. Seriously, like lifting someone else up and saying good work or retweeting them or calling out that they've worked extra hard on something, it costs you nothing, but it could really make a big difference for someone else. So now that we've covered my 3 prime directives, again, not Robocop's, mine, it's time to talk secret weapons. Some of these are more familiar than others, and some of them require more explanation than others. So I'm going to hit these, and then after that, we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. I figured this is the part you're most interested in, but really, those 3 prime directives of mine, I would credit for a lot of my personal visual style and aesthetic. So my secret weapons. Number 1, done is better than perfect. Your worst viz is the one I haven't seen. So if you have a Tableau public portfolio, you likely have a couple hidden things out there. I had one that was hidden for quite some time. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't figure it out. So finally, I just said in an act of vulnerability, I can't figure this out. And I posted it anyway, saying it was incomplete. I actually got some really good feedback on it. And I ended up later revisiting it and going in a new direction and creating a much better Viz. But the Viz that you haven't finished, unless you've lost interest and it's not going anywhere, get it done. Because much like doing art, an artist never feels done in any piece of work that they're working on. They just reach a point where, okay, this has to go out. That was my feeling of my Iron Viz entry. I hit it very early at the beginning of the month, and around mid-month, I was thinking, well, I have another 2 weeks I could work on this. Until someone just advised me, like, no, like this is just put it out now. And I did, and it was an incredible relief, and I was happy with my product, and I moved on. And I think that's an incredible way to approach work. That's why I have a portfolio of like 125 Vizs or so, because I attack a Viz, I do it until it's what I want it to be, and then I stop. If you don't care, neither will anyone else. It sounds harsh, but in reality, if you're working on a topic that you're not super interested in, and again, this isn't about your work product at work. Everyone at work sometimes works on a project that they're not super fired up on, but that's your job. And as your job, you are a subject matter expert in what you're working in. But if you're doing something in your own personal time and you don't even care about it, no one else will either. Seriously, no matter what your skill level is and no matter what you're putting on the page, it's not going to be something that comes across. But if you are super invested and you put in the time and effort, regardless of what the topic is, people will be into it, and people will respond. I'm saying that I'm watching the documentary right now, The Last Dance, about the 1997-98 Chicago Bulls season, Michael Jordan's last season there, as they're going for their like sixth win in terms of the championship. And I don't care about sports at all. And I don't mean that to be negative. I don't hate sports. I'm just super agnostic. Like I don't really have any drive there. It's an amazing documentary series. And because it's amazing, despite the fact that it's not a topic that speaks to me personally, I'm into it. Team up. Collaborative vizzes are great. So for so many reasons, I've done several at this point. One great aspect of doing collaborative vizzes is you get to see an entirely different behind the scenes working style from how you traditionally work. If you work in an office setting and you're close with your teammates, you're probably getting some of that already, but a lot of us aren't working in offices right now and we don't even see our teammates. Um, but if you're working in a collaborative viz, I've teamed up with Kate Schaub, Adam Miko, I've done stuff with Sam O'Droll, I've talked about doing stuff with some other people. If you work in a collaborative viz, you're going to get an amazing cross pollination of passions and talent and aesthetics. Um, so by working with someone else, you're going to learn new tricks you haven't thought of before. You're going to be challenged and think about stuff in ways you haven't before. And ultimately, the end result is probably going to be better than you would have come up with on your own. So, for example, I'll talk about I did a Girl Scout cookie viz with Kate Schaub. So, one of my fascinations with the Girl Scouts has been I see how many cookies they sell, and I know they make hundreds of millions of dollars off of them. But then I hear from my friends who are in the Girl Scouts and all the fees they have to pay and the uniforms they have to buy. And I was like, where does all the money go from the cookies? If we're selling so many cookies, where does it go? So I did some research on the Girl Scout websites, and they're very open about where the money goes and what they spend it on. And I teamed up with Kate. I said, hey, I have a couple of visuals here of an idea. Would you be interested in working on this with me? And she enthusiastically jumped in, and we hit it together. And we both had a lot of fun working on it. We both worked on different parts of it, and it ultimately sort of coalesced into this thing we were both happy with. And at the end of the day, it was a much better viz than if I had just done it myself. Create an army of experts. So, like I said, you're part of a community here. You're part of a network, and different people have different skill sets, different passions, and different interests. And it's incumbent of you to take advantage of that. So I have many different friends that I tap to pull in for different things, and it varies based on what my needs are, and if I think they will get what I'm doing, or sometimes if I think they won't get what I'm doing. Because honestly, if enough people tell you something's not working, it probably isn't. Iterate and then reiterate. Iterate when you're working on developing something, multiple iterations is fine. Reiterate, I'll get into that shortly. And lastly, this will be the most confusing. Think like a dyslexic. So I'm going to go straight to think like a dyslexic, and then we'll hit some of these other backup in a second. So my 9-year-old is dyslexic, and I don't mean dyslexic like she has trouble reading. I mean dyslexic like her brain is literally wired differently. She's going to be starting her 3rd year at a school for dyslexia, and we discovered she's first dyslexic in 1st grade, which is about the earliest you can catch it. We would be doing her sight reading exercises for school, and she'd be going down a page, and we're talking extreme frustration, tears every night. It was shattering for everyone. But every night she would go down a page and she would see the word like when, and 3 different times she'd see the word when, and she would say 3 different words. And it was confusing and frustrating as parents to be working with her because we're like, look, it's the same letters every time. And we sort of reached a tipping point towards the end of 1st grade. We did some testing. We got her dyslexia diagnosis. Um, and we're fortunate that one of the 14 schools for dyslexia in the US is located about 15 minutes from my house. Less fortunate at the price, but we have to do what's right. So I remember towards the end of 1st grade, my daughter in tears one day saying, I'm not going to go to 2nd grade, am I? And my wife was very serious with her and said, why do you say that? Who told you that? And she just goes, me, and points to her chest. She knew that she was behind it, something wasn't working. And it's because dyslexics don't see and process the world the same way the rest of us do. They actually have to learn differently. They have an entire teaching method specifically for dyslexics to teach them how to read. And I do drills with her every night. In fact, the way we dissect words is more like you would dissect a picture. So I will drill her on a specific word. I will say, how many letters are in it? What's the 4th letter? How many letters are big? How many letters are small? You know, repeat it back to me. What does it mean? And by drilling some of these things into their heads, they actually learn to read and write differently than most traditional learners do. Um, it's interesting, though, that so many historic figures and people that we consider aspirational figures have been dyslexic, and we just haven't necessarily been that super aware of it. So this is my daughter's school. It's the Bowders School. They operate similar to Hogwarts in that they sort the kids into houses when they arrive. So there are 4 famous dyslexics that each house is named after: Einstein, Da Vinci, Jobs, and Edison. And they do competitions for house points based on doing extra homework and exercise and competitions and stuff like that to keep the kids fired up. And it's really done an amazing job in sort of spurring her progress forward. It's a journey, but it's worth it. So this is an example of their house points at their school. Henry Winkler is a famous dyslexic, and I think this quote's particularly fascinating. That's why I chose to put this on screen. How we learn has nothing to do with how brilliant we are. So my daughter was always diagnosed as being very intelligent, but we were, at first very confused about why she did so poorly in anything that involved reading. She was doing great in like sciences and maths in 1st grade, which, I mean, it's 1st grade. But we at first thought she just wasn't very interested in reading, and it turns out the reading slights were more with inability and not lack of interest. So, in terms of dyslexics and seeing the world differently, here's 3 famous ones you might be aware of. So, we have the famous polymath Leonardo da Vinci, who, I mean, we've seen the Vitruvian Man, we've seen his helicopter designs, we've seen his sculptures. He was a voracious, I mean, Renaissance man. Like that's the term came from somewhere, right? Um, Dyslexics don't look at the world like we do, and as such, they ask different questions and they see different opportunities. Walt Disney. I mean, in addition to changing the way that people thought of animation, making it worthy of theatrical presentation and feature films, but also his theme parks and utopian dreams of Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Like he, when you hear Hamilton and the soundtrack, like Hamilton never stops writing, Walt Disney never stopped creating. It's fascinating. And Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, through many hurdles in his life and ups and downs, and being kicked out of Apple and coming back to Apple, and then deciding, I bet I can make a phone that's the size of a pack of playing cards, and it won't have buttons, and it'll work on a screen. And essentially, now we all carry these around like they're an extra organ. Like he's changed the way that society operates simply through vision and determination and drive. So let me show you some examples where I thought about stuff differently. Um, and part of thinking about stuff differently sometimes is a sense of playfulness, curiosity, and willingness to just bomb. But before that, again, some more famous dyslexics. This is the Dyslexics Wall of Fame at my daughter's school. They have famous dyslexics up there, but they also substitute out students from time to time to make them part of the big journey. Because for them, they talk about it as a superpower. Because while it is definitely something to overcome, if you can learn to operate within it, you will find opportunities that other people simply can't see. So this is a timeline of Marty McFly that I created from Back to the Future. In Back to the Future, Marty jumps throughout time from the 1980s to the 50s to the far-flung future of 2015. But as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, for Marty, he is still aging and progressing forward along a straight timeline. It's really his location in time that is changing, but for him, it's always forward. So I envisioned the Back to the Future movies of Marty moving forward and his position in time moving up and down. This might be one of my most controversial visits, surprisingly not so much because of the timeline, because people got really aggro about the background. So I had some friends that were super excited about the color and said, wow, bold color choice, and other friends that were like, that's glaring and awful. But I decided to stick to my guns and go with it, and I'm very happy with the outcome of this one. In this case, I decided to use pie charts for something other than their intended use. And sometimes thinking differently means being a little trolly, because I know the Tableau community really dislikes pie charts. But I thought, you know what? I bet I can make a really great pie chart viz. I just might have to use them a little differently. So I looked up a bunch of Marvel Comics characters and their sort of alignment to different teams that they're part of, because a lot of people are on different teams simultaneously. And by using the pie to represent the character and the number of slices to represent their team makeup, I was able to show their characters as like colorful little circles with different shapes on them, which is really a great way to represent the idea of superheroes. But I had to go a step further because I do enjoy the trolley out, aspect of doing this with pie charts. Just like I'm gonna dare you to like a pie chart. But on top, I had to do some additional detail and show sort of the underbelly of the Marvel universe, also pie charts. So there's several characters that formed a little cabal to sort of try to proactively stop bad stuff from happening with predictably terrible results. But by showing the colorful side of the universe on one page and then allowing a click through to flip the script and turn everything upside down and show you what's really happening behind the scenes, it was a fun way to convey those ideas. This is a data set about birth dates and popularity of names over time. So actually, sorry, wrong data set. This is the data set in the Billboard Top 100. So Adamiko did a really fun viz, which showed these are the songs that were popular when you were born. Um, and I looked at that and I'm like, well, but what songs are popular about 9 months before you were born? So taking some inspiration from Billboard Music Colors, I created something that kind of looks like a magazine mock-up. And if you enter your birth date, you can find the top 10 songs that were popular around the time you might have been conceived. So if you would like to permanently scar yourself like Cesar Pico did, finding out that he may have been conceived to Let's Get It On, um, I recommend this viz. Also, it's fun to just send to people to say, hey, happy birthday, here's your songs. Using the same data set, however, I created an entirely different kind of viz. So Mambo Number 5 by Lou Bega lists a whole bunch of ladies in it. And I was curious about how old might these ladies be in 1999 when the song was released. So I created this joy plot, and on it, I call out the peak month for each birth name. So not the average, but when it was the highest. And by doing such, I can say, okay, assuming that each of these ladies was born around that time, this is how old they would be when Mambo Number 5 came out. Also, I put a note in here that I'm not calling Lou Bega out, claiming that Jessica is actually 12 years old. It's just when Jessica was at her peak. So, assemble an army of experts. I have various friends and allies that I call on when I'm working on a viz because I need feedback. And sometimes I need devil's advocates. Sometimes I need people for design questions. When I need design questions, go to Judith or Samo. When I need a devil's advocate or a health expert, I go to Lindsay. When I just need a friend and some guidance, I go to Josh and Adam. I mean, these are some examples. I have dozens. But really, having a network that you can lean on to go beyond yourself, because your knowledge is limited, your experience is limited. But if you're able to tap in to this greater community, you're able to exponentially expand your ability to do things. And this is my last big point. So I talked about iterating in terms of your development, but I'm going to talk about reiterating. And by that, I mean going back to the well of a data set you've explored before. Why not? You do it at work every day, right? You've been using the same data sets for years, slicing them different ways, trying new things, coming up with new calculations and ideas, expressing stuff in a different way. But we don't do that for our own data sets that often. So we might do a single pass on a UFO data set and never look at it again. You find a single story there, but is that the most interesting story? Are there better stories? Are there stories that are more interesting or relevant now? So I'm going to show you an example of a particular data set that I've hit at least 5 or 6 times. I'm not going to show you all of them. But by doing so, you can see not only some sense of progression in my personal style, but a progression of thinking about the same data set. So this is a data set of video game genre sales that I got off of Kaggle that I've looked at several times. This was way back fairly early in my Tableau stuff online. And I didn't really have a solid idea of what I wanted stuff to look like yet. I thought I could create a playful data set telling the story of genre sales within Nintendo, allow some interactivity, and use some cool character elements to make it interesting. And at the time, it was very fun. Now it feels very embarrassing and kludgy, but it was a great step to orienting myself to this data. So while it feels awkward to go back and look at this in my portfolio now, I'm glad it's there because you can see how I changed the way I think about stuff. The next time I came back to this, the results were very different. So this is version 2, just called genre. The bubbles at the top have sort of become associated with me because I really leaned hard into that. And while it's a chart most people don't really like, I like the fact that I was able to represent the different console generations as different rings within them. And I found it really visually stunning. So I was really happy to sort of embrace that element and make that the centerpiece of this visualization. This is my third pass. This looks a lot like what Bo McCready does. Bo likes to do small multiple area charts, and he did something very similar to this with movie genres. So I thought it'd be very cool to do it with the game genres and just sort of see the different peaks and valleys and what the different volumes were over time, as well as the overall sales representation. This was a total departure for me of the stream graph, which was very difficult to do, and it took me about between 8 and 14 tries to get it right. But when I got the final result, I was very happy with it. I was listening to Blake J. Harris's Console Wars at the time, which I highly recommend. And I was fascinated to see when different companies sort of came into the scene, dropped out of the market, expanded and contracted. And this was a really great way to do that, while at the same time being very visually poppy. This is my most recent version of that, just called Splat. It's a 9-panel grid of 3 different companies and 3 different generations of their consoles and what the genres look like splattered across them. It's a little more artsy, but it's a cool way of showing at the same time the sales volumes as well as the representation of the different genres within each of these. So now, my secret weapons are your secret weapons. My secrets are on the table. You got no excuse now. But I highly recommend embracing these ideas because I could have done a tutorial walkthrough of hands-on dissections of my vizzes, and that wouldn't get you to the same place that embracing a lot of these ideas would. I'm really happy to have talked with you today, and I wish you could have fun now. Any questions?
Thank you, Zach. It was incredible. Thank you for sharing all your passion about data visualization and storytelling. So
Thank you.
we have just one question right now. So Ajay is asking, he wants to learn how he can improve color choices while working on a Viz.
Sure. So early on, I would tell you one of the first things I did was I started looking up movie color palettes online. So someone somewhere has done this thing, and I think Judith displayed this in her talk where she would actually grab colors out of a scene. Someone's already done that. If you type in movie color palettes, you'll see scenes from a movie, and it'll show you the most prominent colors displayed in that scene. So early on, my thinking was if I'm looking at this picture and this picture is visually appealing, and then it's telling me the colors that are in it, I know these colors will also be appealing. Also, some of the vizzes I've shown to you, like those genre vizzes, I'm using the hue circle color palette from Tableau there. I didn't come up with that. They put together a great color palette already, and I just leaned into it. Other times, there is coolors.co, that's COOLORS.co, And it's an amazing website that allows you to cycle through a color palette. So if you select one color, it'll then continue to cycle other colors that are complementary. And as you lock in more colors, it creates a palette for you. So all those are great choices to picking colors that work well together. Also, just look up graphic design and look up other stuff. I mean, honestly, we are a visual medium, but we're not the only visual medium, and there's lots of other work other people have done to lean on. And if you see stuff that looks good somewhere else in terms of color, it would look good for you.
Perfect. Thank you. And Zach, I had one question, and this is something which I get regularly during my interactions with everyone of my customers, right? And the question is about that on Tableau Public, everyone is creative, right? Because the data set is limited. You can just go ahead and create some nice looking chart, right? But once you're working with the business data, things are different, right? So what's your experience and what's your feedback on that?
Sure. I mean, data in motion and data at rest have to be handled differently. So a lot of my vises more recently that you've seen, and some of these were in the mix, I have leaned heavily on very traditional simple charts, bar charts, line charts, pie charts, all of which work very well with organizational data that's in motion. Some of the other charts, like the stream graphs, the more exotics, don't necessarily play as well and are often more difficult to interpret anyway. So, I mean, honestly, in terms of creative choices you're going to be making at work, you're probably going to be leaning heavily on bands, bars, pies, lines, those sorts of things. The same tools we've always used. And that, at that point, it comes down to, in terms of making a good visualization, understanding the principle. I don't want to put too much in a page. I want to be concise. I want to make something that looks clean. And we have excellent examples in the community of people that do that with data viz. It looks beautiful and it's functional.
Perfect. Thank you. So JR is asking, where do you turn to the reliable data sets, especially for the more niche topics?
Great question. So Kaggle is one of my go-tos, as well as just general Google searches. But a lot of times, if you see a movie data set, like I have a visit of the day on Nicolas Cage that was based on Rotten Tomatoes data, I hand cultivated it. I had 3 John Wick vises, and for those, I actually watched the entire John Wick movie franchise, recording every time he shot someone and who it was. It was a lot of work, but it was fun, and I got some cool business out of that. And that data set is available on Kaggle also. I put that out there. So sometimes you got to be the change you want to see in the world, and if you want to know how many times John Wick shot people, you might have to look that up yourself.
Awesome. So Pradeep is asking, what is the inspiration for your Iron Vest?
Great question. So, with our Iron Fist topic this year, health and well-being, I was sort of strapped because I had just done several of those topics on vaccinations, like I was talking about with my Hans Rosling topic, and I thought about going back to the well and hitting that data set again. But I was really struggling to find something that I was just really interested in right now. Not that there's not unlimited health topics that are of merit and value, but if you're going to put in 30 hours, it's got to be something that you're really attracted to. So for me, I thought about the idea of representation and how important that is for people's mental well-being and sort of in feeling a part of, the show, part of society. And I was talking with a friend, and he said, well, look at the topics you like and find a crossover. So being a comic book nerd, I thought about all the important Black comic book characters that I've seen throughout history, and the fact that so many of them, like Black Panther, was made by Jack Kirby and Lee, who are 2 Jewish guys. And while they're amazing creators and had a great impact on society, it's going to be really hard for them to sort of understand the Black experience and represent it authentically. And then I thought of Dwayne McDuffie, who is unfortunately passed away in 2011, but he was an influential creator. He went on to do lots of animation work and he died very young, but he had a huge impact in terms of creating a lot of characters that resounded with authenticity through the creation of Milestone Comics. So I found that this amazing BET data set, which was just the top 100 list of famous Black comic book characters that they were into. So I then supplemented that with research on Wikipedia and other places, and I built out this data set of these characters to first show you, hey, look, this is when characters were introduced, but more importantly, these are the characters that were created by Black creators that were sort of that have the authenticity of being made by someone that actually understands the experience. And I wanted a visual element to tie that together. So I thought about the four-pitch comic book printing process, which isn't unique to comics, but it's CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which if you just use the older CMY method of printing color, you could never actually authentically create the color black. You could create very deep grays, but by blending those three colors, you could never reach sort of a true black color. And I thought it was a great analogy for the process of creation, how it's very difficult for someone that hasn't been in those shoes to create the experience of being a black character when they're speaking about it as two Jewish guys in New York. So I sort of tied those two elements together, and hopefully it goes well.
Awesome. I think I have opened your visualization. Do you want me to share it?
Sure.
Okay, let me just. Yep, it's beautiful, right? I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
I think
So
that
this
that
this
yeah. Please go ahead. Sorry.
this was really me stretching myself. I don't like to work in long form. It's not a very natural feel for me. And like I said, if you look at a lot of my modern work, a lot of my recent stuff is me going for a single visualization because I want to get an idea across. And sometimes simplicity is the best way to do that. Here, I used a lot of different charts and I chose some colors that can frankly be glaring, but I thought the transition between the upper portion of my viz with the white background to the bottom portion with the dark background as I work through the story of, different eras of comics, these different groups of characters and who they're being made by, and then sort of getting down into the story of Milestone, this company that was a long shot and yet the characters still live on. And the legacy of Dwayne McDuffie. So I thought it was a really fun thing to do. It was definitely not inside my wheelhouse, although the colors are, I had to, man. I had to swing for the fences.
Awesome. Thank you. We have just one last question, and it's about, does it make more sense to have similar one type of chart, or you can have different charts in your dashboard? What's your feedback on that?
Yes. Um, it all depends on so many variables. So first off, who's your audience and what do they understand? Depending on who you're developing for, you might be working people from a C-suite, or you might be working with program managers that have their hands deep in the materials. So what you might give to executives will be different from what you give to people that need additional levels of detail, and that can drive your chart types. Additionally, what kind of data you need to represent, as we know with Andy Kriebel's visual vocabulary, also is a heavy impactor on your chart type. So, I mean, I would very rarely say having the same chart across every sheet would be the best option, but it's something that may happen organically. But really, just have as many different tools in your tool belt and know when to use them is what I would say most. Audience matters most to me.
Perfect. And just last question is that, are donut charts popular or recommended when it comes to business dashboards?
If that's what they understand best. I mean, that's my best answer because sometimes there may be a chart that you don't love, and I'm looking at you, Tableau community. We don't like pie charts that much, but for someone in the business that you're working with, they may really get pie charts that may really resound to them in a way that a stacked bar won't. And in that case, go for the pie or the donut.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Zach. I think it was a pleasure to have you on VizConnect. Thank you for inspiring us. And I think it has been great to have you in the Tableau community. I have been following your work, and I will advise everyone, go ahead, just follow him on Twitter. I think he has been best in giving feedback. Just reach out to him. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zach, for coming on VizConnect.
Thank you.
Perfect. With that, thank you everyone for joining the session. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourself and be safe. Bye bye. Have a great weekend ahead.